I'm happy to introduce Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist Jose Vargas. He has written for daily newspapers, The Washington Post and the San Francisco Chronicle, national magazines like The New Yorker and Rolling Stone, and he's appeared everywhere from Nightline to The O'Reilly Factor and The Colbert Report. On HuffPost, he created the blog Technology as Anthropology, which focuses on tech's impact on people and how we behave. And now he's going to tell us some more about his great work. Welcome, Jose.
This is way too early to be talking, but I have the distinct pleasure of being your first speaker today. When they asked me to speak, they wanted me to talk about the millennial movement in particular. And I felt a little bad about this just because I was born in 1981, so I think I'm what you call like a cusper or something. So I'm not sure that I quite fit the millennial age thing anymore, but I'm gonna pretend that I do. And so I guess I want to tell you a little bit of a story. Three summers ago, I spent about 6 weeks and 5 interviews profiling Mark Zuckerberg for The New Yorker. This is before the Facebook movie came out, The Social Network. I had friended Mark on Facebook in 2008, so we had been Facebook friends. I was one of his 879 Facebook friends at the time. And when I saw the trailer for The Social Network, I just had this as much as I love Aaron Sorkin, I just had this bad feeling in my head, in my stomach, that this movie was gonna be like, oh, these spoiled tech-savvy millennials ruining the world. So I contacted Mark Zuckerberg's people and I said, I want to write a profile of Mark like he's never been profiled, and I think I'm the best person to do it. Which was a little arrogant of me to say, but frankly, I believed in that. And to my surprise, they did. They let me, interview him, 5 interviews and no holds barred. I asked him about the Winklevi, the twins. I asked him about privacy. I was asking him all these kind of uncomfortable questions that a journalist is supposed to ask a profile subject. And what was interesting around this time, and I remember this distinctively, is, Mark has had this kind of reputation as to how he's been caricatured, right? And he's not really that kind of guy. The guy's pretty social. So at one point when we were taking a walk, at that point he was living 8 blocks from work. So his his house that he found on Craigslist was 8 blocks from work. So I convinced him to take a long walk just from his office to the house back to the office. And in this long walk, at one point, he turned the tables on me and started asking me questions. And he's like, so Jose, where are you from? It's such a simple question, but it completely, absolutely stumped me. And I remember physically stopping and looking at him and just giving him kind of one of my eyebrow looks. I was like, because he was asking a really sensitive topic. So here I am profiling, Mark Zuckerberg, the most successful millennial CEO, right? The guy who in some ways is helping lead this millennial movement. And he was asking me this very simple question, and I couldn't answer him. I couldn't answer him because where I was from was a place where I wasn't even supposed to be interviewing him in the first place, because I wasn't supposed to have a job. I wasn't supposed to even be here, and people like me were supposed to be deported. What Mark Zuckerberg didn't know, what the New Yorker didn't know, what the Washington Post didn't know, what the Huffington Post didn't know, what all of these employers that I've had all these years didn't know is I'm actually what they call an illegal immigrant, which I prefer to be called somebody who's undocumented, who doesn't have the right papers and the authorization to be here. So after interviewing Mark Zuckerberg and writing this long-ass story about him, it was published in September 2010. And I'm one of those people where I learned to write by reading The New Yorker. The New Yorker was like my Bible. After this, I couldn't do anything anymore. I was approaching 30 years old. I was about to be 30. And I realized that I couldn't do anything else but write this next story. So after that story, I wrote a 4,000-word essay basically coming out about being undocumented and writing everything down about why I'm here and how I got here. And the headline in the New York Times was Outlaw. And in this story, I ended up talking about how I was born in the Philippines, how my mother sent me here to live with her parents, my grandparents, to give me a better life, and how when I was 16, like any 16-year-old, I went to go to the DMV to get my driver's permit. And that's when I found out that the green card that my grandparents had given me was fake. So this was in 1997. The only reason I became a journalist was because when you write a story, there's a thing called a byline, you know, like your name is on it. So my thinking as a 17-year-old was, if I'm not supposed to be here because I don't have the right kind of papers, what if I'm on the paper? I figured I could just write my way into America. That was my plan. I figured, you know, you could like write for like the Washington Post or the New York Times. You can like win some big prize. You can write for this thing called the New Yorker that everybody who's influential reads. You can do all these things, and maybe then you'll get like, you know, papers. Well, that wasn't the case. And because I also happen to be gay, I've come out twice in my life, and I'm totally done. But the interesting thing about that is, as far as I'm concerned, we're not really coming out. We're just letting people in terms of what it's like to be openly gay and what it's like to be undocumented in this country that doesn't recognize us. So after writing the story, I became in some ways like a walking uncomfortable conversation. And I have done about 130 events in 30 states in 2 years, traveling to Alabama, South Carolina, Georgia, Wisconsin, Ohio, and trying to engage as many people as possible, including Tea Party members and Republicans, to talk about this issue. And what's been astounding to me is, as the most, quote unquote, prominent, undocumented person in this country, I expected to kind of hear from somebody. I thought someone was gonna, you know, contact me and say, go back to the Philippines. Because, you know, I don't know if you know this, the Obama administration has deported more than 1.2 million people in 5 years. That's more than any other president in modern history. And I just assumed that I was gonna be one of them. And so when I didn't hear from anybody, I contacted the editor of Time magazine, who I happen to know, and I said, hey, I wanna write a story about why I haven't gotten deported. And he was like, okay. And what ended up actually happening was, a year after this was published, I wrote a story based on all the questions that people asked me as I've traveled around the country, right? And to me, these questions underscore why immigration is the most controversial, yet least understood issue in America. People simply do not know how the process works. So I get questions like, why haven't you gotten deported? I don't know. You have to ask the government. When I was reporting the Time magazine story, I actually called the government, the Immigration and Customs Enforcement. I said, hi, I'm Jose Vargas. I'm writing a cover story for Time magazine. Why haven't you deported me? Are you planning to deport me? Why? Why not? The person on the other line was like, off the record, what are you doing? And I'm like, what are you doing? Like, what are we doing? Y'all know we're here. Y'all know that we're not just mowing your lawns and babysitting your kids and picking your strawberries. You know that we go to your colleges. You know that we're neighbors. You know that you need us. So what's really going on? So I get questions like, why don't you just make yourself legal? Because I'm a masochist and this is so much more fun. Craving attention. But that, to me, that question just underscores the lack of information in terms of process, that no matter how many times a politician says people like me should get in the back of the line, somehow it never seems to occur to anybody to say, at least the reporters, where's the line? If there was a line, I would not be here. I'd be in the back of the line. But there isn't one. That's why we need immigration reform, right? And again, because I happen to be gay and because the Defense of Marriage Act was just recently invalidated in some ways, I couldn't just marry my way into citizenship like Sandra Bullock in The Proposal, right? It's not that easy. So I get questions like, so you're not Mexican? I'm Filipino. A little tip from me to you, if you see an Asian person with a Hispanic name, it means they're Filipino, for the most part. And out of the 11 million undocumented people in this country, about 1.2 million are actually from Asia. 1.2 million of the 11 million people in this country are from Asia. Philippines, Korea, China. 300,000 are actually from Europe. Yes, undocumented white people. Many more from South America, which means they're not all coming from Mexico. And it also means, by the way, people don't know this, 40% of the undocumented population in this country overstayed their visa. 40%. Which means they didn't just get here and cross the border, like what we often hear in the media. So this is how the story was written, and so the photo editor of Time magazine was like, we're gonna put your face on the cover. I'm like, no. Look how badly that turned out. This is not the most horrible photo ever. So I told them, wouldn't it be so much cooler if we invited like 30 other people on the cover? And they're like, where are you gonna find them? Are you kidding me, on Facebook? So thank God for Facebook, the same Facebook that Mark Zuckerberg helped create. I've been able to be friends with thousands of undocumented immigrants in this country. I've gotten to a point now where I actually have to, unfortunately, defriend American citizen friends so I can have more undocumented friends, because you know there's a limit. And so this is what happened. Can you imagine 35 undocumented people from 15 different countries on the cover of Time magazine? From Israel, from Germany, yes, an undocumented Jew. That's Roy Naim, who was born in Israel and moved to New York when he was 3. Peru, China, Korea, the Philippines, Guatemala, Ecuador, represented on this page. On this cover, 22 million copies of it, and the headline is, "We are Americans, just not legally." And for me, I gotta tell you, by the way, for me, the toughest thing about this is, imagine trying to get 35 young people, many of whom have never flown, because they can't fly because they have no ID, trying to get to New York. The guy there you see with the eyes, Victor, flew from Alabama. He got to Alabama when he was 6 years old, and when you fly, all he has is a Mexican passport. And if you have a Mexican passport, sometimes people at TSA actually check it. And if they don't see a visa, they can actually arrest you. So he flew for the first time, and he had the number of his lawyer on his bicep, just in case anything happened. I want you to think about that whenever you get through TSA. How many people are having that exact same experience? So for me, the millennial movement has actually been about the fact that more and more undocumented young people in this country, out of the 11 million undocumented population, the young, tech-savvy, millennial generation of undocumented people have really changed the game when it comes to this issue, insisting to be seen as human beings, insisting to be seen as full, and using technology to tell their own stories, right? And this is actually what this is about.
We need to solve this problem.
Illegal immigration.
Illegal immigrants
You
come from Mexico.
Angel Island immigration.
It is a national security border.
We are not
racist
racist.
It's a human rights issue.
Comprehensive immigration
Legalization,
reform.
if you meet the following
Democrats think even if something doesn't pass, they can get it. The politics of this are very
complicated.
Hi, I'm Julian.
My name is David. I'm from Chicago.
Hello, my name is Mitzi. My name is Melissa. My name is Anthony.
My name is Cindy. I'm 21.
I can tell you how I came here as a child found
Born in Lagos, Nigeria.
Tel Aviv, Israel.
We just wanted to make this video so we can share our story.
But I needed to add my voice to it.
My identity.
I am undocumented.
I am undocumented.
I'm undocumented. If you're
Coming out means telling a friend, a loved one, a classmate.
I am an American.
You know how people say that social media is nothing but like a narcissistic self-vanity act? that all we do is over-communicate and talk amongst ourselves. Well, for these young people, social media is actually a way to not only connect with each other, but to say to this country that they call their home that they exist. That they exist. That's what social media is about. Being in Indiana for me has actually been great because as I've traveled, so I've done about 30 states and I actually have not been to Indiana. And Indiana is an important state. The 2 senators here, one voted for immigration reform and one did not. There are 9 congressional House members from the state, 2 Democrats and 7 Republicans, and we don't know what they're about to do when it comes to this House immigration bill. So I accepted being here today because in some ways I wanted to just make sure that you understand that we need you in this fight. We need this multi-ethnic, multicultural, the most diverse group ever this country has ever seen to help us with this fight. That this is also your fight. That this is not about a Latino, this is not immigration, it's not a Latino issue. This is not simply about border security. This is not simply about the US-Mexico border. This is actually about who we are, who we were, and where we're going, right? And the last thing I really want to say is, in college, I majored in political science and African American studies. I was fortunate enough I graduated college in 2004. I graduated high school in 2000, way before the DREAM Act kind of became like a mainstream thing. I was fortunate enough that a venture capitalist just sent me to college for free because I couldn't afford to go to college without financial aid. I studied African American studies because I learned very early on, after moving to this country in 1993, that in many ways this country invented white as much as it invented black, and that I needed to understand from the history of the civil rights movement, right, how people in this country fight, and how being in America has always been a fight. I don't know if you realize this, but next month is the 50th anniversary of Martin Luther King's I Have a Dream speech. Next month, August, is the 50th anniversary of the March in Washington, the March for Jobs and Freedom. And one of the things that grounds me, that kind of helps fuel my work, is a quote from Martin Luther King, in which he says that history will record that in this period of social transition, and we are in another period of social transition, the greatest tragedy is not the strident clamor of the bad people, but the appalling silence of the good people. So we can't afford you to be silent anymore, and we really need your help. For me, a broken immigration system means broken families. I moved to this country on August 3rd, 1993, 20 years next month, and I have not seen my mother since. That's what immigration means to me. So thank you so much for having me here today. I really appreciate it. Thank you.
So, was I right? I was right. So that was wonderful, and it's so great to hear you talk about the broad range of your experience. But I wanted to start actually with the quote that you mentioned, because that idea of silence is really compelling, and I wonder how you see millennials either advancing that problem or changing it in the current landscape.
Well, to me, this is, to me, the strength and weakness of the millennial generation is they can't just stay silent, right? So we share, we talk, we connect, right? And either we're using it in positive ways or we're using it in negative ways. Mm-hmm. And I think this is one of those instances where it can be used in a positive way. In terms of just the overall general silence, right? What's happened with this really misunderstood issue is we've had a very vocal, very organized, small minority group of people that have kind of hijacked the entire conversation. As I traveled around the country, I've been working on a documentary now for 2 years.
What don't you do, Jose?
Oh, I just finished filming a documentary, and it's hopefully going to be in theaters in the fall, in the early fall. I decided to send a film crew to the Philippines to film my mom, which has been really intense because, I've seen more of her in the past 4 months editing her footage than I've seen her in 20 years. But I believe, and I know this because I'm a beneficiary of it, I believe that the American people are kind-hearted, generous, compassionate people. Once you actually talk to them face to face and you spell out what's happening, they get it. And they want to help. The problem is we're not talking to each other. We're all kind of going in our own little corners, right? Running towards it. You're illegal. Go back to Mexico. And I'm like, I'm from the Philippines, yo. Like, it's okay. Like, you know. So we're not talking to each other. And I really feel like this is what social media can really help do, is facilitate this conversation.
Well, this is actually a question that was texted in about identity. So how do you think millennials are framing that national identity and the conversation around it, or not?
This is why I'm really thankful that we came up with this brand, you know, with this name called Define American. And please check it out, defineamerican.com. We started it with a group of friends. I feel like we're now living in 50% of Americans under the age of 18 are not white. Right? We are slowly becoming a minority majority country, where everybody in this country somehow feels like a minority. And I think we're living in this kind of exciting age of intersectionality, kind of how all these identities are clashing with each other. You don't have to be gay to care about LGBT rights. You don't have to be a woman to be a feminist. You don't have to be an undocumented person to fight for immigrant rights. And you don't have to be black to care about Trayvon Martin. You know, and I think that's an exciting time that all of us kind of have to harness.
So do you see millennials harnessing it? What's the next trend or the big wave or the thing that you hope you're going to start to see with millennials in this respect? Well,
I mean, I think there's a disconnect between what millennials are doing and how the media is portraying millennials.
Oh, interesting.
By the way, that was my interest in Mark Zuckerberg from the very beginning. You know, because people were like, oh, you know, this is just oversharing stuff. Like, who cares? You know, and in some ways, I think we as Americans are so used to communicating. We're so spoiled in the fact that we can always express ourselves that we over-communicate without actually hearing each other out. Yet, as we know,
and that's getting worse, right?
That's getting worse in some ways. But you give a technology like Facebook and Twitter to the Middle East, or you give it to places that's never had these platforms, and look at what happens.
Absolutely.
And the challenge now for us is, I like to think of social media as, in some ways, as like testing everybody's empathy quotient. Social media, in some ways, is testing our empathy quotient. You know, are you following people on Twitter who don't agree with you? I follow as many Republicans as I possibly can. Oh no, sometimes they like just go on the attack, and I get really frustrated. I breathe before I tweet. Like I engaged Michelle Malkin a few months ago. I don't know if you know Michelle Malkin. Kind of a conservative woman. It was an interesting 2-hour Twitter thing.
Go look it up. It's worth it.
It was actually interesting. And I just was like sitting in the lobby of the hotel going like, okay, just breathe. Do not hate on her. You know, hear her out. There isn't anybody in this country that I wouldn't talk to.
Well, when you think about, because we have this huge audience here and at home, that's really trying to figure out how to talk to millennials and how to not only reach out to them, but how to help them figure out this communication piece. And I wonder if you had any advice that you could give to those folks as they're trying to sort of help us navigate that, and as they're also trying to figure out what to make of what the media says, because we're both journalists, right? We're part of the problem as much as we're part of the solution. And I think we know that there's a lot out there that people promote because they can. And how do you make sense of that, and how do you take it home and apply it to the millennials in your life or your office?
Well, I mean, to me, what's so interesting, I mean, I grew up in newsrooms. I've been in newsrooms since I was 17, right? So is how closed off most newsrooms still are. It's still very much a one-way conversation, which, oh my God, the New York Times, thank you for allowing me to comment on one story out of everything on your homepage. Wonderful, thank you.
And newsrooms don't look like us, by and large.
You know, that to me, by the way, is one of the greatest tragedies in the news industry, is the fact that we are an increasingly diversifying country, right? And the country is only gonna get browner, it's only gonna get more Asian, it's only gonna get gayer.
You heard it here first, folks.
I'm sorry to say this. This is the truth. It's either we deal with that or we don't. And the lack of the diversity in media hurts all of us because we don't have enough people in newsrooms framing the conversation in the ways that they should be framed.
So I got to ask you, because we got about 40 seconds left.
Really?
One of my big, we've got this huge clock.
That just went by fast.
One
Okay.
of my huge pet peeves is when people complain about millennials to me, they say, but the one thing I love about you is that you're colorblind. And I would love for you to riff on that for our last 30 seconds. Are millennials colorblind? Jose Vargas.
In sixth grade, Mrs. Mitchell was wondering why I was coloring my mountains red. And they sent me to a clinic, and that's when they figured that I was really actually clinically colorblind. So I'm more than brown and green colorblind. I'm actually like monochromatic. So that's why I'm not racist. So that's my answer.
I love it. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me.
Please.
Thank you.